Hello and welcome to a tutorial video for SoulLink AI alpha version. This tutorial is specifically for setting up a melee and ranged combined AI. What I'm doing is using this sorcerer skeleton from Mr. Nectarus's Army of Skeletons pack. And we're going to have one melee attack with this staff and one ranged attack where it uses the staff as to cast a fireball spell. I've already looked at the animations, and there's a fireball spell animation, a little warm up, and then a shot. And then there is the staff hit, which he whacks his enemy with a staff. So those are the two attacks we're going to use. Before we can create our animator template, first thing we want to do is create the projectile for the fireball, because in the process of creating our animator template, we're going to have to specify the ability object for the fireball spell, and that will require a projectile reference. Technically, I could leave that blank and add that later, but it's better to have it done up front. So I'm using the asset called magical, and there is a fireball. So when I drag the fireball into the scene, and this has some scripts on it already to move it and to spawn things when it hits, like a fire explosion, and it has a lifetime script, and all these scripts we don't need on here because we're going to be spawning it through the SoulLink spawner, and it's going to be moving through the combat system, etc. And it will also despawn using a component from SoulLink. So let's remove all these scripts. And we're going to add in, first and foremost, a projectile script. We're going to set the damage type to fire. We'll leave these, let's make it 10 minimum, 10 maximum damage. Destroy on hit. And we're going to have a collision spawn, but we have to also set that up before we can add it here. What else we need is a timed despawn. So if the projectile is flying through the air for too long, we'll let it despawn after, say, 5 seconds. We also have to add the spawnable component so it can spawn through the spawning system. We don't need a despawn delay. We can leave these two the same. It does not require a nav mesh. And you should always use isPersistent for projectiles. Currently there is a issue if we don't have that turned on that might crop up. This disable agent on despawn, you don't need that. You can just uncheck it. Okay, so now we have the fireball projectile. I'm going to go to my prefabs folder. I'm going to go ahead and create a new prefab now. Make that an original prefab, fireball. Let's go back to Magical FX and let's find the fireball explosion. Where is the explosion? Fire. I don't see it. Hang on. What is that? Fire explosion. Oh, there it is. I don't know why I wasn't seeing that. Okay, so I'm going to drag that into the scene as well. Also, lifetime script, we'll remove that. We'll replace that with a timed despawn. This is not a projectile, so we don't need to make it a projectile. Make a 5-second despawn, and also make it a spawnable as well. Same thing, no delay. Does not require nav mesh, persistent, and disable agent on despawn. There's persistent. would normally keep it in the scene and never despawn unless you force it to despawn, and that's basically what we'll be doing when we do a time despawn. It will go back to the pool. Alright, with that, let's go to our prefab folder. I'm going to create another prefab with this fire explosion. Now in the fireball, we can just directly access the prefab. We can add this collision spawns, add one, and put fire explosion. So when it hits the enemy that you're targeting, the little explosion will go off when it hits. I can remove these from the scene now. Right. Now we want to create the ability object for the fireball. So go to SoulLink AI ability object. We're going to call this fireball. We'll call the ability name fireball. Is a ranged attack, fire damage type. We'll select medium range, just arbitrarily. It could be long range if we wanted. Uses attribute means that if we select an attribute here, such as mana, then it will require that many points that of mana in order to cast the spell. 100% probability. That really doesn't necessarily apply in this case because the projectile has to hit the target. Then we add the attributes affected. We want it to affect the health and make it 10 to 10 damage, so it'll be a fixed 10 points of damage. And here's where we put our projectile that we've already created. This is why we created it ahead of time. The fire spot, which we are going to add to the model hierarchy, which will determine where the projectile fires from. We need to give it a name. We're going to call it fireball. Caster effects are only relevant for support classes right now, so I'll just turn that off. I'm not going to add an ability sound yet, and I'm going to make this a 5-second cooldown so that it will take 5 seconds before it can cast this spell again. Okay. Alright, so now we have everything we need. We've got the projectile for the fireball, we've got the explosion effect when it hits, we've got the ability object fireball that we'll use in our template. So now we're going to create a template. I've already created one previously for this to test, but I'm going to create a brand new one here. So we go to create SoulLink AI animator template. And we're going to call this skeleton sorcerer. We need to have at least one idle animation. Go back to here. Okay, I've got my skeleton sorcerer here, and all the animations are down here. Let's find the idle. There's skeleton idle. Make sure you have this speed set to 1 or you'll have issues. And the only other ones we need here is walk forward. And there's a walk animation here. These animations, by the way, for these are non-root motion. So I'm gonna, when I create the AI, I'm gonna not use root motion. I also need the run. All these left, right, and backwards are not currently being used yet. They will be in the future. Again, making sure that has the speed of 1. I'm not going to use jumps for this character yet. We do have hit animations. I'm going to use just one. Should be a hit. Hit from front, we'll use that one. Speed of 1. Death animation. There should be at least one death animation. There's a dying, we'll use that. Speed 1. And now ability groups. For the ability groups, we're going to have 2 ability groups, one for melee attacks and one for ranged attacks. But we're just going to have one in each group. So let's add the first one. We'll call it, actually let's go ahead and create 2. So they'll both remain empty until I edit them. The first one we'll call melee attacks. These characters do not have equip or unequip animations. That would be an animation where it looks like the AI is reaching back, say, to grab the staff and pull it out, or pull out a sword. So we're not going to need those. We do need to put an idle in here for when it's in melee mode. And I believe the melee mode, combat mode A, is what is used for melee combat mode. Speed of 1 again. We make sure we always hit the speed of 1. We do not need to add a walk forward or a run forward because they will automatically copy from the base unless there are specific ones you need for this combat mode. And then the ability animation will be the various attacks, and we're only going to use one. And as we discussed earlier, it's going to be this staff hit. Oops. Speed 1. Always make sure that speed goes to 1. The ability object for this, we can just use a melee light, which is already predefined, or you can create your own. So now we have our melee attacks. So let's go down now to our second group and call this ranged attacks. Again, no equip or unequipped. We do need the idle again though. In this case, the idle animation is combat mode C for using the staff as a spell casting weapon. Speed 1. Do not need walk or run. They will be copied again. Ability animations. As we said, we're going to use that fireball spell. Again, speed of 1. And we'll use that ability object that we created called fireball. We will let it auto-create weapon sets and attack sets. It will create a combined, mixed mode. We'll have both of these, and then each one separately as well. Right before we continue, I'm going to go into the model hierarchy here. And this is the staff when it's on his back and the staff when it's in his hand. So we're going to change the name of that to staff underscore stored. So that's the stored position. And this one we'll call staff underscore equipped. That will come in handy after we create the AI. Now for the animations, we do need to put events on them, so when it does attempt to use them, it will be able to perform the ability. So let's look at first the staff hit animation. We scroll down to events and hit play. Okay, right about there where it strikes, we can hit this add event. We're going to call it event underscore perform ability. And hit apply. I could also add sound events and so forth here, but right now I'm not going to do any sounds. We can add those later. And then we have the other animation, the fireball, or fireball spell. So let's hit play. Right there where he thrusts out. Add an event. Event perform ability. Apply it. Okay, next thing, we're all set there. Okay, now we can actually create the AI from the template. Go into Tools, SoulLink Editor, and it brings you right into the Setup AI. We'll just change the name, Skeleton Space Sorcerer. We do not want to use root motion for this particular model. Now again, that's going to be based completely on the models you're using, the animations you're using. This model does not have root motion animations. I'm going to call this Skeleton Sorcerer. And we're going to use the template we created called Skeleton Sorcerer. I'm using the Vector third-person controller in this project, so it has a lot of already created tags and layers, and I'm going to use the enemy tag and enemy layer. These are completely up to you. The faction, I'm going to use monster. I'm going to make the agent width a little bit narrower, a little bit shorter, 0.25. Everything else is good, so we'll go ahead and hit Setup AI. Right, so now we have the basic AI. A couple things we want to do though to finish it up. First thing is we want to add a faction relation. I'm going to go ahead and add a faction relation for NPC and make them hostile. In the scene I have the Ellen character, which is an NPC, and that'll give us the ability to test the AI to attack her. And we want to also add that fire spot we were talking about, like where the fireball is going to come flying out of. And for purposes of this demo, we're going to make it simple. I'm just going to make a child game object that's not in the hierarchy itself, but is part of the model. And we'll call it fire spot. We're going to move it up about to the midsection of the body and pull it out a little ways. This is about where you'll see when it holds the staff out when the fireball goes. And notice this blue arrow, this is the forward direction. This is where the projectile will be aimed. We do need to add the fire spot component and give the actual name that we'll be looking for. If you remember, we said in our ability object that the fireball fire spot name is what is going to be used. It does not look for the name based on this name here. It looks for this fire spot name here. Okay, so we have that now. We do want to go into our combat. And we're going to look at our weapon sets. And since there are no equip animations, we're going to set auto equip on switch and auto equip on switch for both ranged and melee. And that way when it needs to quote unquote switch weapons, it will just simply appear in his hand and disappear from his back, and vice versa. And one final thing to do, since these projectiles and the explosion will be spawned through the spawner, we need to go into Pool Manager manually and add them in. I've already added two categories, projectiles and explosions. I could have just called this one effects as well, and this is where I can go into my prefabs now and put a fireball into the projectiles and hit add. And we'll just leave the default to 5. We're only going to have one of these. We don't care. If you had a lot of these AI and you knew they were going to be shooting all at the same time, you might have to make more of these or have it grow in size if it needed more. Now for the explosion, we want to add that fire explosion. Same thing here. We don't have to change anything. I'm going to save this scene. Alright, now where I've got the AI right now, if I were to run it right now, it would just move up and attack with the staff. So let's see if that works. If I did everything right and I didn't forget anything, see what happens. There we go. Oh, and there he goes. He just went up and attacked. Now he's going to cast a spell and blast her. Oh. Now if I were to start him further away, oops. Well, that does bring up one other point. I do want to go into the combat system and increase the detect range to about 15. Since this AI is going to be using longer range attacks, you should be able to detect at longer range. So now, let's make it 20. Should immediately detect, I would think, and then start shooting. Yep, just a little bit, and there it goes. Missed because she was moving. And there, hit again. And that's it so far for this tutorial. I will maybe give some additional guidance offline for the aiming system, or do another video to add aiming, which will make it a little bit more precise with its attacks. For now, that's it, and thank you for watching.